following is a presentation of the Belly Up Sports Media Network.
Week 10 is here in the NFL. Another brutal bye week. Not so many teams off, but the ones that are off are killer in terms of fantasy production that's lost this week. We'll talk about that and how we're going to navigate those waters. We've actually got a couple of high-profile injury returns this week to talk about, which is always nice here. We've got a game ongoing right now from Germany, such as it is. We've got a Thursday game to talk about, and we'll go over all of the action that's coming up today. All that and more coming up right now on Belly Up Fantasy Live.
Rieger getting traded to Minnesota changes nothing.
6'4" guys running 4.4s. These guys don't grow on trees, and a lot of times I'm willing to bet on, especially long term, on the freak athlete.
You don't ever want to overreact to what guys look like in preseason. There's been a ton of preseason all-stars that never make rosters or never pan out. There's the whistle. It's game time. It's been game time. We've got, as we said, we've got a Germany game going on right now. But welcome into Belly Up Fantasy Live, everybody. I am your host, Chase Thornton, coming to you as always from the Mott and Bailey Basement Bar this morning. And yeah, Week 10 is here. We've got the a couple of juggernauts on bye this week between the Eagles there and the Chiefs. We've also got one of the best offenses in all of football. The Dolphins are off today. We've got the Rams are off, with a couple of high-profile names in their camp. So, yeah, the bye week's coming. They don't stop coming, I guess. But we are not alone to talk about it with you today. We are our friend Kevin Wilson. Kevin, what do we know?
Well, just like to, yesterday was Veterans Day. So I'd like to give a shout-out to my fellow brothers and sisters that served this great land yesterday, and I hope you all took advantage of all the specials and discounts that were going on yesterday, and I certainly did. And so just a happy Veterans Day to everybody, and I'm looking forward to these games right here, and we have, as you mentioned, a lot to talk about, and I'm certainly really looking forward to getting in it. And also, we're still in tropical mode over here. I'm still enjoying my Seagram's Escapes right there. So we are set here. I don't know about up there in Wisconsin, but we're set here.
I've got a breakfast stout this morning. We all like the beers anyway, but breakfast stout, trying to wake up a little bit this morning. Get some, get a good feel there. So yeah, let's get at it here. So looking back to last week, Belly Up League. We had some bad luck.
Yes, we did.
I
had bad luck all the way around because at one point I was winning in every single one of my fantasy leagues, every one of them, and life was beautiful. Then Jamar Chase stepped on the field and it went completely down the crapper, and I think I won like one of them, maybe two.
Yeah, I was.
And that's all I had. I lost one by 1.5 because Jamar Chase caught 4 balls.
Justin Herbert was that guy for me that kind of crushed my hopes for the week. I thought I was set, and then he came out and gave me all 7 points, I think, across the board. So
it was a rough fantasy football Sunday last weekend.
And it was not high scoring. There was not a lot of scoring. Last couple of weeks, actually.
No, but like I said, I blame it on one guy, our friend Jamar Chase. And so hopefully we can turn that around this week and move on to sunnier and happier times.
Yeah, we took a 30-point loss last week to Team Sean Goodson, 172 to 202. We had the third highest score in the league, but we ran into a juggernaut last week. He had Taylor Heineke had a nice game for him.
I had that same issue in one of my redraft leads. There was 2 people that outscored me. 2.
Yeah.
One of them happened to be one I was playing. So,
yeah. No,
and that's the guy I lost to by 1.5.
No, he also had CeeDee Lamb. He had Jonnu Smith in the big 60-yard touchdown that he had. We are now 4-5, Still 10th out in the league, but still only a game out of the
somebody
playoffs.
scores more than 200 fantasy points, there's not much you can do.
No, yeah, you throw up your hands and you give it a shot.
Throw up your hands, you give it a shot.
But here in week 10,
hats off to him.
Yes, definitely hats off. Here in week 10, we've got the corner booth. They already have Hunter Henry going in this game. We have Ramondre Stevenson. Neither one of us is getting a hell of a lot of production on that so far.
I say that we take the loss on that because we expect more from Stevenson, obviously.
Well, we would hope, but that hasn't necessarily been a given. He's going to have Austin Eckler and Breece Hall at running back, so he's a little stacked there. We, on the other hand, have to monitor our lineup.
We certainly have to do that.
With Jamar Chase being questionable, looks like he wants to give it a go, whether he will or not. We'll see.
Well, they raised 2 guys off their practice squad at wide receiver, so that does not speak very well.
2 guys that no one's heard of outside of their own family.
No, and you're most likely, I'm going to go out on a limb and say you're not going to hear about it here either.
No, dude, don't be starting anybody there. But between Higgins and Chase, the problems they have there, they need bodies. Literally,
they certainly need bodies.
It's questionable. We've got Drake London.
We got Drake London back, so
we've got some things.
Hopefully, he can score more than 5 or 6 fantasy points. That would be awesome.
That would be a key. But that's how things are looking right now in the Belly Up League. We are one game out of the playoffs right now, though, because of the parity, which is nice in that league. But we need it. It would be nice to get some luck on our side.
And we need Hawkinson to play today. He has been questionable, and if it looks like he's going to be a go, and so he should eat today if he is a go.
Yeah,
that's a great matchup. So hopefully he's on the field.
We need to hope that, because otherwise we're going to have to go pick somebody up just to fill into that slot. We don't have a backup tight end.
No, that's the kind of roster you kind of want anyways. No backup. So
especially when you've got a top 3 option like Hawkinson. But we are on the sleeper app too, though, which means if he's out, we can't just plug him into IR. He has to actually be on IR. So we would have to determine who to drop.
Some sleeper, you could put that in there.
You can change that, but
you can change that. We did not discuss that. Well, there was a lot of discussion about even having an IR spot in our league. And finally, we agreed that yes, there would be one, but they actually have to be on IR.
Yeah, that's the default setting on sleeper.
Yeah. So that's not helping a whole lot of people.
Yep. All right. But like we said, we did have a Thursday game. Carolina team,
kind of.
Take it. There was a contest of sorts.
Yeah. They threw the football out there. Some people showed up.
Milled around.
Hopefully, you did not start a whole lot of those guys in that game.
We just had an interception in the Germany game. But anyway, we'll get to the Germany game in a minute. Thursday game, Chicago 16, Carolina 13. My boys and I were not cheering for the Bears as Packers fans, obviously. My little guy started out as cheering for the Bears, but then he tends. My 4-year-old tends to bandwagon. And if a team is cheering for,
that's fine. You feel your way around.
He's figuring it out. He's 4 years old. Yeah. But so if the team he's cheering for doesn't do well early in the game, sometimes he'll switch loyalties on the fly. He was
You're gonna have to break him out of that, though.
He was not thrilled with how things were going early in that game. But for the Bears, switched his loyalty to the Panthers, and then was disappointed when he woke up to hear that.
If the Panthers, what an interesting team that is. That were fairly competitive a year ago. And they are just absolutely bottom of the barrel.
It's a rough game to watch.
It's a rough game. And happily, I dropped Hubbard just before that game because I needed to make it. I needed another player, and he was invisible.
He wasn't the only one. There was a hell of a lot of fantasy visibility. Period.
No,
on the Panthers here. Bryce Young going 21 to 38 for 185 yards and no scores. No, he didn't throw an interception either, which is nice. Only ran the ball three times for 18 yards. So he didn't get a ton of points. Not that in redraft or one quarterback leagues you were starting him anyway, but it meant that Adam Thielen did get you double digits in most formats, 6 catches on 10 targets. You still like the 10 targets for Thielen, but only 6 catches for 42 yards. And as his quarterback goes, he's going to go. He's already outperformed your expectations this season. But I mean, with Young looking so difficult to pay attention.
He's the anti CJ Stroud at the moment, unfortunately for him.
Right now, that looks like a huge windfall in Houston's direction. Now,
give him a minute though before you
that's the thing.
You're ready to ride him under the table.
If you were expecting a whole hell of a lot fantasy-wise from Bryce Young this year,
right? Yeah, you weren't looking for that, and I just saw a comparison between him and the quarterback for Jacksonville. His name is escaping me. Trevor Lawrence. That's right. I should remember him. He's on my roster. Anyway, and the comparison, it was absolutely eerie because they were not good, both of them.
Right.
All their stats are pretty much in line. And as we all know, that Trevor Lawrence has certainly turned that around. But
no one questions Trevor Lawrence is a legitimate NFL quarterback.
Right. And the thing that's got to concern you, because Frank Reich is a quarterback guy for Carolina, and he hasn't been able so far to do a whole lot with Bryce Young. So, and that's what kept Trevor Lawrence behind us, because he had the worst coach maybe in the history of mankind coaching him. But since then, he's certainly turned that around. Although San Francisco today is a tough row to hoe, so we might see what he does there.
Friend of the show, Nelson here. Let you know that I'm here on things. We had a message up here that said that there were some connection issues between Kevin and myself here that causing an echo. So if you are hearing an echo, we apologize for that.
Yeah, I'm not hearing it, so hopefully I'm okay because he didn't mention me.
Yeah, no, you're coming through straight and fine.
Okay, good. Because to me you are too. So
yeah.
I guess if you're connecting outside the two of us, maybe that's where the problem comes in.
Give me one second here. All right. Now, Kevin's gone, but that doesn't leave us a whole hell of a lot of a show. So, there's something with our connection here that's causing a echo here that we're dealing with on our end too. But bear with us, everybody here.
Yeah. Don't turn away. Keep on coming with us.
So give me a second. So I'm not going to try and trash Kevin out of here, but we'll try and make sure that if we can work around an echo this way, we'll work around an echo this way. We'll bring Kevin back in for his response to some of this here. But so we've got, like we said, Adam Thielen, 6 catches, 10 yards, or 6 catches on 10 targets for 42 yards. Jonathan Mingo didn't have a real great day, 3 catches on 7 yards, on 7 targets for 20 yards. Things weren't a whole lot better on the other side of the field with Tyson Bagent, 20 of 33 for 162, 6 out of 12 on rushing. I mean, he just, there weren't any fantasy points to be had here outside of Deontay Foreman. 21 carries, 80 yards, and a touchdown. He also caught a couple of balls for 12. Rashawn Johnson didn't do a whole hell of a lot outside of catching 4 balls on 6 targets, but he didn't have any yards to speak of. DJ Moore has suffered without Fields on the field. Cole Kmet didn't do a whole heck of a lot there, although he did see technically a rush carry there for a 1 yard as well. Is there anything on either of these two teams right now that excites you from a fantasy standpoint, Kevin? Because I know you're still with me, and I'm going to bring you back on here. Is there anything that excites you for either one of these teams, fantasy-wise, going forward, unless and until we can get Justin Fields back on the field?
Well, you would think that Cole Kmet would have some value because tight ends and young quarterbacks go hand in hand. But it seems like because he only had 9 fantasy points, and so you're looking for more. Hopefully, you're not starting tight ends probably on a Thursday night anyway. But if you had to start him, that's all you got was 9 points out of him, and so all the on both sides of this dilemma is Adam Thielen was doing well. We like what we saw out of him, but he's being held back by his quarterback play. DJ Moore had some big games right there, which his quarterback is who knows where he is. We don't has he even been cited? We don't even know. And so no, so if you've got any of these guys, Bears or Panthers, I think that you probably bench until something shows you the way. Maybe a light in the sky or something. But these guys, none of these guys are exciting to me. I got Cole Kmet on a couple of my fantasy teams. I really want to like him, but it's not showing up. Let me see. I could pull that up here. Cole Kmet. We had 23 points a week before. So, but he's got Detroit next week. I just, you got to bench him, I think, until you see something that gives you positive spin on him.
Right. Again, not to not to trash out, but it doesn't echo on my end if I take you off screen, Kevin. That's why we're doing this. And if it's still echoing, even though you're not on screen to the outside, it's not echoing on my end when you're not on screen. So let me know if that's different. But Bagent, even after 70 yards rushing the week before, thought we had something there. Only 12 yards rushing. There's just not a whole lot to go on right now outside of Deontay Foreman on that team. And so, yeah, I mean, until Fields gets back, you're not getting a lot out of DJ Moore. I keep running him out there because I had him on a lot of rosters this year. I keep running him out there. He keeps disappointing, keeps underperforming. I'm going to start looking elsewhere unless and until we can get Justin Fields back on the field. Cole Kmet is a good enough tight end that you probably have to keep running him out there anyway. You probably don't have a ton of better options on your roster to go with, and at tight end, with it being so volatile anyway, you're probably just going to live with that. But it certainly is frustrating right now on that side of things. On the Carolina side of things, we at least thought we had Adam Thielen, but with Bryce Young's struggles, Adam Thielen has not been consistent. There has been no sign that Jonathan Mingo or anybody else on that team is going to, elevate. And then they've completely gone away from Miles Sanders and elevated Chuba Hubbard to the starting position, and that hasn't done anything for him either. Chuba played 50% of the snaps to Sanders playing 38%, and you got all of 9 carries for 23 yards, 2 catches for 16 yards out of Chuba the other day, whereas Miles Sanders gave you -5 yards rushing and a couple of catches for 15 yards. So is there anything in Carolina that has you excited that you even want to look at and try and deal with?
You just mentioned Hubbard, and as I mentioned, I dropped him just before that game on Thursday and didn't miss out on anything. And so both of those guys I thought might have some value coming into this year, especially Hubbard, because you could add, you didn't have to draft him most likely. And last year when he stepped in there, it was productive. But this year, -5 yards. I could give you -5 yards. Come on now. And so neither of these guys, I dropped them, as I said. That needs to be the MO on these guys right here. And if you got Young and Dynasty, you're not doing any of that. You're not dropping him. None of us are advocating that. But the rest of these guys are all interchangeable, I think. And even in Dynasty, I see really not a whole lot to like here at all with Carolina.
No, I tend to agree with you there. There's just not a whole lot going on, and unless and until you can get better and more consistent play out of Bryce Young, you know, Thielen's going to continue to be a dart throw every week, even though he's performed great and he's outperformed all expectations. You did not draft Adam Thielen to be a top 10, top 12 type wide receiver this year for you. But yet, you know, if you did draft him, that's exactly what you've gotten. You've gotten a top 5 to this point in terms of total fantasy points, wide receiver in fantasy, which is completely outside of the realm of what anybody thought was possible for him. But he is going to continue to be kind of volatile as long as Bryce Young continues to play so inconsistently and struggle the way that he has. You know, you're going to get some 20-some point games out of him like you have. You're going to get some 10s and 8s like you have the last couple of weeks here from him. So moving ahead then, and now looking at this Germany game that's going on right now, it's still 7-3 in about halfway through the third quarter here. It's been a rough game. We kind of joked around before the broadcast here about Mac Jones. He's been, you know, the first half, he only missed one pass, 9 of 10 for 75 yards in the first half, but he was sacked 4 or 5 times, depending on whose count you're looking at. But Ramondre Stevenson with only 25 yards rushing and a couple of catches. The only thing to really cheer about was Jonathan Taylor having a touchdown there in the first half on 37 yards rushing. Michael Pittman had 3 catches in the first half for only 25 yards. Again, not a couple of teams that we have looked at this season as offensive juggernauts, and you haven't been getting a ton of fantasy production from these two teams in any way, shape, or form. And we just had, as I mentioned, we had an interception there by the Patriots here. They got the ball back, drove it down, had a field goal attempt that they promptly missed. So we are stuck on 7-3 here, giving the international crowd our best show from the NFL. Anything, I don't know if you've been watching the game here, Kevin, but is anything sticking out to you about either of these two teams fantasy wise? Is there anything that you're looking at on these two teams? Not necessarily for the rest of today, but maybe going forward in terms of their fantasy production and anything that excites you there.
Well, if you happen to, and I was not in on Michael Pittman really coming into the season, but if you look at this, the last 3 weeks, he has 11, 12, and 11 so far today targets. Yeah. And so he is being targeted, and he does have a touchdown today. And so, no, that's wait a minute. No, that's I'm wrong.
No, that was Taylor had the touchdown.
He didn't. Yeah, he did not have a touchdown. Okay, so, but you look at this. He has 13 targets this year. He has 14 targets this year, and so he is a target monster. That's the same thing we talk about with Deontay Johnson, and so he's going to give you the opportunities. And Gardner Minshew has not been absolutely terrible. He's been serviceable as the quarterback. And so Michael Pittman has outproduced what I thought coming into the season. Because, you know, he was expected to be – he probably had to draft him as a number 1 wide receiver, and I didn't see him as that. But he has performed well. And so I like what I've seen from him so far, even though their production really hasn't been there. Because right now he has 6 catches so far today, and so I like that. You mentioned that Taylor has a touchdown, but he's only averaging 3.1 yards per carry. That's not going to get it done. And so I know he's Jonathan Taylor, but I'm glad that the two of us did not invest a whole lot. We didn't invest anything in him, and so you know, if you've got him, you got to keep running him out there. But he has not been Jonathan Taylor. And as far as Stevenson is concerned, we got to keep running him out there. We got no other choice but to do that.
It's who we have.
Yeah. But he has 42 yards now, so he's pushed that total up a little bit. 3.8 yards a carry, ain't getting it done either. And so you got to hope that something puts a rocket up his rear or something, because he's our number 1 running back. We took him in the back of the second round, and he hasn't given us that. And so it's been disappointing to say the least. But in his case, you got to keep running him out there. And as far as New England's wide receivers, none of them. No receivers. You're not interested in any of those guys.
Nope, I agree completely. I everybody who's followed the show, watch me on Twitter and watch me on MD's show, watch me on our show, knows how I feel about Devontae Parker. Now, he didn't even, I don't think, make the trip with them this week. He's out. But there's just nothing to be excited about in that pass game right now. Mac Jones has not been, he's not been fantasy helpful for anybody on that receiving core, but it's not necessarily a deep, talented receiving core either. I mean, they drafted Demario Douglas and Keyshawn Boutte, and Douglas, for one, has at least looked halfway, like a usable football player, but not necessarily usable fantasy wise. They bring in Juju Smith-Schuster, who was the default number one last year in Kansas City. He hasn't done a whole hell of a lot. In fact, the first time they haven't even got to mention his name today on the broadcast was for a penalty. Good work, Juju. And he's still young. Juju Smith-Schuster is not old. He feels like he's been in the league since about 1973, but he's not old. But he hasn't given you a whole heck of a lot there. Tyquan Thornton hasn't given them a whole hell of a lot. They haven't really utilized their tight ends, Mike Gesicki and Hunter Henry, as much as I think people would like to see them use them. I think people had visions of the old two tight end sets in New England between the return of Bill O'Brien and having Gesicki and Hunter Henry at their disposal. That hasn't happened. You bring up Pittman, though. Yeah, Michael Pittman, I think, my big thing on him coming in the year was I wasn't sure how Anthony Richardson was going to do throwing the football. But outside of one kind of stinker game that Pittman had with 4.5 points, he's been remarkably consistent, getting you double-digit fantasy points every single week. And he is soaking up the targets in this offense right now. And Gardner Minshew is looking his way a lot, like you just said. So Michael Pittman, a guy and we'll talk about this in a minute here, but with trade deadlines approaching here, if you are needy at wide receiver, Michael Pittman, a guy that you might be able to bring in and could give you at least that consistent fantasy production where you kind of can set him and forget him as a wide receiver 2. And then occasionally you're going to get wide receiver 1 production out of him. He's right now, overall points, fantasy points, he's wide receiver 11 on the season. So he's given you that borderline wide receiver 1 production. If you can pick him up for cheap, he might be a guy that could at least give you that floor going forward. And then you can concentrate your efforts elsewhere in your lineups. But I do like him as well. Let's listen to our ad read here. We come back on the other side. We will talk about that trade deadline a little bit. We might talk about a little bit of trade philosophy and see if there's anything out there that, that moves that you guys might want to make, or that, anybody that we think might be worth trading for. We'll talk about some of the games we like, and we'll touch on the injury situation, like we said, around the league, with seemingly about 876,000 wide receivers on the list. But first, let's listen to our ad spot here from our friends at SeatGeek.
Hey everyone, it's Ryan from No Credentials Required to talk to you about one of our newest partners at Belly Up Sports, SeatGeek. Yeah, live sports is great on television, but the feeling of being at the arena is a priceless experience. That's why our friends at SeatGeek are there to help you find the best tickets at the best prices. Not only can you get tickets to sporting events, we can also get tickets to concerts, comedy shows, musicals, and more. Search for your desired event now at SeatGeek.com, enter promo code BellyUpSports at checkout, and you save $20 off your first purchase. SeatGeek. Life's an event. We have the tickets.
All right. Definitely get out there, live yourself some life. Use that code belly up there. Get yourself some tickets from SeatGeek and see something, do something, live a little bit. All right. So like I said, trade deadlines are starting to approach in fantasy leagues, depending on what your league settings are, how many weeks is your regular season and that. But trade deadline is approaching in a lot of fantasy leagues here. Kevin, I guess you and I haven't talked a ton about trades between the two of us. We've mentioned, or at least searched for maybe a couple in our in our Belly Up Fantasy League there to maybe try and help boost our own boost our own profits there and make ourselves a little bit better. But do you tend to be much of a trader in your fantasy leagues? Do you do a whole lot of trading? Do you look for trades at all, or are you just kind of like you kind of play it by ear, and if somebody shoots one off at you, you'll consider it? Do you actively look to make trades to make your team better usually, or is that something that you kind of like let fly under the radar?
I'm not what you would consider an active trader. And I did make some trades even before the season began. I don't think I've made any since the season started. And I traded and got Jordan Love. So there's some trader remorse going on right there.
Definitely.
But someone will offer, I will look at it. And it seems like if you're in leagues where you're not really familiar with the guys that you're playing with, that you're going to get some trades that are just absolutely just idiotic, for lack of a better word. And, hey, I was born last night, or I was born at night, but not last night. Okay. And so I most of the trades that I've seen have not been even worth considering more than 2.5 seconds. And so if there's a trade that could help me, and I don't look to be one of those trade rapers either. And so, I'm not looking to take advantage. If someone offers me something that's trade raping them, that's on them. But, yeah, so I would certainly not consider myself an active trader at all, especially in the leagues that I'm in. They're 10, except for the one that you and I are in, are 14 man, but 10 or 12 man. There's usually help enough to be found on the waiver wire that, it's just me. I'm evaluating the guy. There's no one else involved. So do I like him? Yes. Well, let's pick him up. And so that's where I usually fall in as far as trades are concerned.
Yeah, I tend to be a lot more active. I tend to see a lot more trade volume in my dynasty leagues. Now, when you're in 20 plus dynasty leagues, that tends, you're going to see that. But no, I tend to be a lot more active in dynasty leagues trading than I am in my redraft leagues. Part of it is, you mentioned your redraft leagues. If you're not overly familiar with the people that you're playing with, you do tend to see a lot of those. They'll spit something off to you that's just kind of out of left field. And I don't mind a trade request out of left field as long as the trade request seems reasonable. But my philosophy on trading, and I've said this before a little bit, and we can debate this and discuss this a little bit, but I don't like sending a trade request out of the blue with no prior contact, no prior, context. And I don't necessarily like receiving them so much because, like you said, 9 times out of 10, it seems like the ones that pop out of the blue, the other guy is only thinking about him or herself. And listen, I know we all want to win the trade, but yeah, it's one thing to feel like you came away with the better end of the trade, but you also gave something that is of value to the other person. Listen, if you've got 5 top 20 wide receivers, and you trade one of them for a top 20 running back, you're not out anything on you didn't hurt your team at all, but you got something back of value, but you also gave something of value to the other team. It doesn't have to hurt your team to be able to help the other team. And the corollary to that is the other team can come away with value of their own without having to completely destroy your team. I think people tend to view trades as a zero-sum game, like somebody has to win, somebody has to lose. No. Now, obviously, if you trade away the number one running back in points per game and points scored that season for a wide receiver 4 type that is mercurial, you trade away if you're going to go ahead and trade away a CMC type for Gabe Davis, obviously that's way lopsided and somebody won and somebody lost, right? But those types of trades shouldn't happen anyway. There's no reason why both sides of a trade can't come away feeling like they got something of value for their team. And so, I think the best way to arrive at those situations is to actually discuss trade options and trade ideas with the partner that you're trying to trade with beforehand. I always feel like it's more productive to approach someone and ask if they're interested or what their interests might be and if there's a deal there. Because then if you talk about it and you don't come to an agreement, you talked about it and you tried. If you just send a trade offer out of the blue that the other guy feels is way out of whack, or if another guy sends you a trade offer that's way out of whack, and it gets deleted and moved on, or it gets rejected and moved on. Now both of you kind of feel like, well, screw you, buddy. I feel like the best way to avoid those situations is to actually talk about trades before you go into the actual offer. What's your take on that?
Well, I kind of like that. I've been in some sleeper leagues where fellow managers have listed, hey, I'm putting this guy up for trade, or this guy, or this guy, this guy. And you can look and say, you know what? I could use that guy. So then you contact them. And like you said, you make, some overtures, and then the other person comes back. Like in one league, this guy floated Smith, my Seattle Seahawks quarterback. And I was like, okay, so what are you looking for? Well, I'm not giving you a first round draft pick for him in Dynasty. I'm not doing that. And then he comes back and says, how about a second round? Well, now we could discuss this. And then I said, okay, well, I'd rather keep my second round. How about 2 third-round picks? And so that's where that's sitting right now, waiting for him a response back. But we have discussed it. He has said, hey, right from the start, this guy's available. I said, hey, I'm interested. And we, did some things. And if nothing happens, okay, that's fine. But at least I was able to see some guys that when they put them out there like that. So, okay, I can think about it before I say something. Right. This guy, okay, I like him. This is what I think I could give for him, and approach things that way. So I know a lot of leagues, I guess, you could say that you're interested or whatever, and people can see that. But in Sleeper, you can actually say, this guy's on the trade block. So I like that aspect of the Sleeper app.
Yeah, I like that Sleeper makes it a lot easier to see. If I feel like that's one thing I'm on record as saying I don't think the Sleeper app is the be all end all of fantasy football apps. I don't think it's head and shoulders above any other application out there. But I do like that it does make it easy to see who's on the trade block, and like you said, then you can see, okay, who might be willing to get rid of a guy that I might have some interest in. But I think that opening that dialogue up before there's even an offer made is always the way to go. I've had it happen several times in my dynasty leagues this season where we've started a dialogue, a conversation about some things, and maybe neither one of us comes away with what we originally thought we were going to come away with, but we have been able to come to an agreement that has helped our teams in some way, shape, or form. And it's different in Dynasty. There's obviously more assets that you're talking about. You're talking about future draft picks there, and now you're talking about looking down the road and where your team is at in terms of team building. But even in redraft, I always think it's better to open that dialogue with somebody so that you can try to. For one, it allows you to avoid those hard feelings. You guys can talk about your philosophy. Here's why I like this player. Here's why I think this is a good trade for you and for me. Maybe you see it different. One of the things, and I talked about this with a buddy of mine earlier this week, I absolutely hate like when you put together a trade on some of these apps and the in-app trade evaluator is like, oh, this is a terrible trade because this is going to net you 36,000 points for the rest of the season, and the other guy is going to miss out on 3 points. Not necessarily, because a lot of these trade analyzers that are in-app in terms of like on the platforms, NFL.com, Yahoo, whatever, they're taking into effect, they've got their, this is what a guy's going to score for the rest of the season. That may not necessarily be the case. I realized that we all came into the year thinking Miles Sanders was the number one, to bring up a guy that we've talked about. We all came into the year thinking Miles Sanders was going to be the number one running back for the Carolina Panthers. That doesn't look to be the case anymore. And even if it does, it doesn't mean that he's going to score anything for you, right? So your preseason prognostications of how many points Miles Sanders was going to score in week 12 don't mean anything anymore. So just because I put out there that I would like to make a trade for Miles Sanders and wide receiver X doesn't necessarily mean that the guy who's getting Miles Sanders is getting 14.5 points in week 12 just because you said he was. But so I hate these in-app trade analyzers like that, and it's one of the reasons why I steer clear of sometimes using these trade calculators that you find online and that too, because they don't necessarily always. All they can do is bake in numbers that have already been punched into the machine. They can't bake in the actual reality of the situation right now, the playing time, the usage, how things are going, whether or not the backup wide receiver or the number one wide receiver has, injuries or got arrested like Michael Thomas did this week. Thank you, Michael. They can't bake all of that in. All they can do is take the numbers that have already been pushed in there and spit it out according to an algorithm. And that's not how football works, and it's not how fantasy trade should work. So those drive me nuts. One thing I do want to ask you about is vetoes, because one of the things that I find myself having to do repeatedly is to stop looking at online. If you're in a fantasy group on Facebook or whatever, every day, every week, you get dudes that come on, hey, here's a trade that went down in my league, and I don't think this is fair. Should I veto it? Or you get guys that come on and say the opposite. This is a trade that went through and it got vetoed in my league, and this is so stupid. Listen, vetoes suck. From my standpoint, vetoes suck. Let other people run their team the way they want to see fit. And most of these trades don't even look all that egregious anyway. You don't get a whole lot of trades where, somebody's trading Christian McCaffrey for Odell Beckham. You don't get a lot of trades that are that stupid that we all can see. There's usually a lot more nuance to things. And I don't like the idea of vetoing a guy's trade that he feels helps his team just because I wouldn't take it or I don't like it. What's your thoughts on vetoes here, Kevin?
Vetoes, as you mentioned, and I like that word, suck. Okay. and you're right. Because I'm in several groups, on Facebook and elsewhere about fantasy football, and I don't think maybe 10 minutes can go by. And then somebody's, as you mentioned, this trade, should I veto it? Well, 98.7% of the time, the answer is no, because it shouldn't be vetoed. And so I am not a bit, I don't think all the years, I don't think I've ever vetoed a trade, ever. And that's the way it should be. And that vetoes just suck.
Yeah, I think it's only the only thing a veto can do is create hard feelings in your league. If the only reason a veto should be used is if there's clear and irrefutable evidence of collusion. These two guys or people, girls, whoever, these two people got together and decided they were going to make one team a juggernaut or try to make one team a juggernaut to win the money in this place. Collusion. If you're in a league where and you're friends with the dudes and girls that you're playing with, that's a pretty serious accusation that you're basically saying, hey, one or two of our friends are trying to screw the rest of us over. That's a pretty serious accusation between friends. If you're in a kind of league where you don't necessarily know everybody, you're in a public league or semi-public league, or you got invited to a league brand new or whatever, I mean, that's a serious accusation of collusion, and it's hard to prove if you don't know the people and if you don't have a paper trail or whatever. Otherwise, just because you don't like the trade doesn't mean that it's not fair. One of the things I've seen on this, I saw this the other day on Facebook, and we can debate all day long whether we all should be spending any time on Facebook anyway, but I saw someone listing a trade and they're like, oh, this is completely not fair. And as part of the reason why it's not fair, they list the fact that Darrell Henderson has only scored 40 some points or whatever this season. They're like, how is that fair when this other guy's got 106 fantasy points on the season? Like I said, like these trade analyzers do, all they can do is take the numbers that are punched in. They can't take into account the reality of the situation. If all you're going to do is look at flat ass numbers, obviously the numbers come into play. Our game is all about numbers. So obviously the numbers come into play, but if all you're going to do is look at the random ass numbers that these guys have scored and not look at the actual reality of the situations, then you come into, if you're going to look at it that way, okay, yeah, maybe you should trade the number 8 kicker for James Conner, because James Conner has only scored about 60 fantasy points this season. And you know damn well that the top 12 kickers have all scored more than 60 fantasy points. That's a fair trade. Nobody in their right mind thinks that it's fair to trade a starting caliber running back like James Conner for a kicker in any way, shape, or form. But if all you're going to do is look at the goldarn numbers and points scored, then that's a fair trade. That's a great trade. You have to look at the realities of the situation. I'm not a giant Darrell Henderson fan. I don't think he's a great fantasy asset. I don't think he's a great football player necessarily. Nobody else did either, because he wasn't on a goldarn roster until 3 weeks ago. But the reality of the situation is that right now he's a starting running back in the National Football League, and so there is fantasy value in that. And right now, Darrell Henderson for Miles Sanders, honestly, which side of that do you want? Would you say that's an unfair trade if somebody wanted to trade Miles Sanders for Darrell Henderson just because Darrell Henderson wasn't on a roster 3 weeks ago and we came into the season thinking that Miles Sanders was supposed to be a top 18, top 15 type running back possibly in fantasy? No, nobody would say that. Nobody in their right mind would say that that is an unfair trade right now because of the reality of the situation. So, yeah, vetoes drive me nuts. Our friend D. Gregorio, 1200 here, like I have up on the screen, says back in the day he got offered MJD, Maurice Jones-Drew, the diminutive wonder for those of you who maybe aren't as old as the rest of us. In the league, he led the league in rushing. He got offered that for Stevie Johnson, wide receiver. Who blew up for the Buffalo Bills for about 8 minutes, started the season gangbusters. That worked out really well for me. He has a laugh about that, but then he goes on further and says that's why he leaves trades up to him as the commissioner, because owners will veto in their own best interest. He'll confer with everyone and make the decision himself. And even in that, I would say, Di Gregorio, I agree with you. Everybody's going to make, that vote in their own best interest, or a lot of guys will. I've been in a couple leagues that have vetoes where, yeah, guys just, I've had people say it to my face. I just veto every trade by default because it ain't helping my team. That's not the way that this is supposed to work. That's pardon my language. That's a dick move. To just say, well, it's not helping my team, so screw them. I realize it's part of the philosophy that you have maybe, and I realize that it might be legal in terms of the laws of your league or whatever, but I don't like that. I do like the idea of conferring with everybody at least, and at least giving people a say on it. But yeah, I come down firmly on the side of the veto should be an absolute last resort, and it should not just be thrown around willy nilly just because it's there for you. Kevin, is there a game here in this early slate that you like, that you want us watching, or that you have a vested interest in fantasy wise? Let's hear about that.
All right, so I think because there's some games that I'm interested in, like San Francisco at Jacksonville, and but the game that I'm interested really in is like the anti-fantasy game, and that is the Cleveland Browns and go to Baltimore, and this is a game where you've probably got guys that you're going to have to make decisions on, because they're the team's top guys, right? Like Lamar Jackson, you're starting him. That's a easy decision to come to. Deshaun Watson, you're leaving him on the bench to me. And so, but if you have guys like Gus, right? And guys like that, and you have to figure out, okay, because Baltimore is number 1 in points allowed, and Cleveland's number 2 in points allowed so far this year. And Amari Cooper, the last time these two guys played, had 1 catch. So, when it comes to Amari Cooper, you're probably you don't have any better choices. So you're going to have to play him. But you're going to have to bring down your expectations no matter if you're playing anybody in this game, because might be one of those where it's 16-13, not because your offenses suck like the Thursday night game, but the defenses are that good. So if you're have any of these guys, you have to make some decisions today, I think, of who you're going to start and on offense anyway. And I think a lot of the answers to this is, unless you have no one better, then there's a lot of guys that should be on the bench in this game right here.
Yeah, no, you mentioned that. I mean, a couple of amazing defense, especially fantasy defenses right now in this game. I mean, I've got a chart that shows all the teams and then where they rank against quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. And I've got the bottom 12 matchup, the hardest 12 matchups I have highlighted in red. I have the best 12 matchups highlighted in green for every single position. And these two defenses across the board, Baltimore and Cleveland, for the big four positions, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, are red across the board. Like you said, you've got the top two defenses in fantasy against opposing fantasy quarterbacks. You've got a couple of defenses that give up very few points to opposing running backs. You've got a couple of defenses, including Cleveland's second best against opposing fantasy wide receivers. Cleveland is best against opposing fantasy tight ends. I mean, these are a couple of teams that you do not score a ton of points on in real life, and they're not a couple of teams that you score a ton of points against in fantasy. But I agree with you that it's a very intriguing matchup. This is one of the games that I had kind of highlighted as one of the fun matchups to watch of the day. We may not see a whole hell of a lot of them on red zone unless somebody's getting sacked all over the place, or we get some blocked Myles Garrett field goals or some interceptions returned for touchdowns. But this is definitely an interesting and fun matchup to watch. My matchup from the early window that I want to look at, that I'm interested in, is New Orleans at Minnesota. Again, speaking of opposing fantasy defenses that are tough to face, New Orleans is one that does not give up a ton of points to opposing fantasy positions, and especially against running backs. The fifth best against opposing fantasy running backs. They're hard. They're hard to play against. Minnesota has not necessarily been so difficult. It's a good matchup wide receiver wise. But I did just bring up the fact that New Orleans' second best receiver, Mr. Michael Thomas, found himself in a domestic situation this week and then got himself arrested. And there's no guarantee that he plays or how much he plays. But you and I both are big Chris Olave fans. I think that's going to be fun to watch in that Minnesota game. But the biggest thing that intrigues me in this game, well, two things. For one, we've got Josh Dobbs now on a full week of practice with his new team. He probably, hopefully, knows the names of some of his teammates, as opposed to getting the plays diagrammed in his headset as the play clock winds down, as he apparently did last week when he came in relief of Jaron Hall. Just a phenomenal job. We've brought up before, you and I have talked before about Baker Mayfield and how he probably played himself into the rest of his career with what he did coming in on short notice with the Los Angeles Rams last season. Well, here we see Josh Dobbs do the same thing, and he's actually done it several times here in the last year. Remember, he went from Cleveland. I think he was on the practice squad in Detroit. Then they signed him in Tennessee. He was the starting quarterback in a game Tennessee had to win to try and make the playoffs. Cleveland signed him back, brought him back. Then they traded him away right before the season because of the Kyler Murray situation to Arizona. And Josh Dobbs has been a startable quarterback for Arizona this whole season. Comes in the door last week, didn't even know the guys' names, literally didn't know the guys' names, had not taken a single snap in practice with the team, and got pushed into service because Jaron Hall suffers a concussion in the game and leads them to a victory. I am excited to see what he can do on a full week of practice. I said when they signed him, it was the perfect kind of move. When they made the trade for him, it was the perfect move for them to try and keep themselves relevant this season, try and keep themselves in the playoff hunt. And it was the perfect move for us as fantasy managers of TJ Hawkinson and KJ Osborne and Addison and Justin Jefferson, to try and keep them relevant fantasy-wise, because he was going to be the best option. I loved that move. I'm excited to see what he can do with a full week of practice with these guys. Kind of sucks that we've got KJ Osborne's questionable and TJ Hawkinson's questionable, and they lose Cam Akers to the Achilles injury, another Achilles injury, so they're weaker in the backfield. But I'm excited to see what Josh Dobbs can do here, and to see what this offense might be able to look like going forward. It's a tough matchup with New Orleans. But on the other side of things, like we just said, I'm excited to see if Chris Olave or Alvin Kamara, or Taysom Hill, I want to see who benefits from any kind of fallout that we might see from Michael Thomas's situation, or does Michael Thomas overcome it and kind of give us all a middle finger in the air and come out and ball out today? You got anything that you're looking at there in that New Orleans, Minnesota game, or does that interest you at all? Or do you have anything riding on it outside of our TJ Hawkinson, TJ Hawkinson in our fantasy league, and B, the fact that you and I are both Chris Olave guys?
Well, a matter of fact, just moments ago, it came across that Hawkinson is in fact playing. So we got that. And there we go. Jamar Chase is playing. So we got that. So that's 2 checks on our side of the fence right there. And, last week you mentioned that Dobbs may not be Baker Mayfield. Well, in fact, he was. Exactly.
Yes, he was.
Even more so than Baker Mayfield was. And so as you mentioned, I'm excited to see what he can do, because when you look at this, New Orleans, number 4 against running backs, number 5 against quarterbacks, number 8 against wide receivers, and number 12 against 10 tight ends. They do not really have a defensive weakness. So what can Minnesota do against them? I'm interested to see that very much. That's a game that I kind of bandied around that I was going to bring up, simply because of the Dobbs situation. And you got to, and it's interesting too, because somebody was like, well, he played well, but this isn't rocket science. Well, he is in fact a rocket scientist. So I thought that was really
literally is, yeah.
Literally. So that was interesting. So I want to see how this game shakes out. And I think Hawkinson, even though they're number 12 against tight ends, I think he's going to have a big game today. He's going to be on the field, and Dobbs is going to look for him. So, certain wide receivers, they thought maybe JJ was going to be back today. Will not happen. But he's on the fast track to play, and seeing as how Minnesota is in fact competitive, he will be on the field, I think, by next week. But so in the meantime, you got to think, who's going to give it up? Is it going to be the wide receivers and the tight ends and all that, or is it going to be New Orleans defense? I'm really looking forward to finding this out.
Nope, I agree with you there on that. Yeah, I think it bodes well that Justin Jefferson, there was so much talk about him possibly, being out or coming back, I should say. And would they bring him back? Would they not? There was so much talk of him possibly playing this week that it bodes well for them bringing him back to try and maintain that 7th seed that they have right now, that they are active in. Late game slot. I'll tell you what, the game I'm looking at here is Detroit and the Chargers. I really like. I mean, obviously Detroit's been fun to watch all season. We're all hoping for to see some life from them finally for their fans. Maybe, I mean, even as a Packer fan, I'm like, yeah, it's kind of a fun story to watch the Lions actually be good for once. Good. They have a good matchup there. The Chargers have been kind of a get right defense in fantasy for opposing fantasy players. And it's not that the Chargers have had to get right, or they're not that the Lions have to get right in any way, shape, or form, but this should be a fun game. We've got David Montgomery, who is active and coming back this week. So we should be able to see, full usage out of him and Jahmyr Gibbs. It should be a nice game for Jared Goff. It's a nice matchup for Amon-Ra St. Brown and for Josh Reynolds and Jameson Williams, if Jameson Williams decides that he's going to come and play and actually be a football player. Sam Laporta, I've loved all season anyway. It's a good matchup for him as well. I mean, like I said, I brought up my chart. It's a lot of green on that Chargers chart there in terms of that. They are the worst team in football against opposing fantasy quarterbacks, and they give up the 4th most points to opposing fantasy wide receivers, 9th most points to opposing fantasy tight ends. They're a good matchup. They're a good matchup for an opposing fantasy offense. On the other side of things, on the flip side of things there, Detroit has been real tough against running backs, but we know that the Chargers running back situation with Austin Eckler is not necessarily like other people's running back situations, in that they will throw to Austin Eckler all over the place if they have to. It's not just like they're going to hand off the ball and let him run and stick into the middle of the line there. That's the toughest matchup in terms of defensively for the Chargers there. So I really think this is a game that could hit the over. You know, if you're a betting type, I really like this game, and I like this game to be able to give us some fantasy points and some fantasy flash and some fantasy fun. What game are you looking at here in the late stages here before we hit the actives and inactives and sign off here?
All right. So the game I'm looking for, other than the Seahawks, because that's, you know, I'm Seahawk, but the game I'm really looking at is might find it hard to believe is the Atlanta Falcons and the Arizona Cardinals. And so the reason why is because James Conner is coming off the IR today. And so can he do better? Because he had 10 fantasy points combined in weeks 4 and 5. Those are the last 2 weeks he was seen. So he's back. But, of course, the big story, Kyler Murray makes his season debut today. So what can we expect out of the two of them going up against Atlanta? Atlanta's got the number 6 running back defense, but they're 23rd against quarterbacks. So Kyler Murray, if you've stashed him, you're ready to unleash him today. And as we mentioned, Drake London is healthy today. And Arizona's 21 against wide receivers, 23rd against quarterbacks. So I see some big production coming out of him today, hopefully for our sakes, because we need that. And so so that's a game right there that I'm looking forward to, pretty much out of necessity, because as I mentioned, we need London to step up big time. And I added Heineke in some of the leagues that I'm in. And so you know, he's a viable starting number 2 quarterback right now in Dynasty if you're in 2 quarterback leagues. So there's a lot to look forward to in this game. And so one thing I'll mention is in the Chargers, you see the over-under is 48.5. And so that's pretty high up there. So I think it's going to be high scoring, but 48.5, I don't know.
It's high, but it could happen.
It could happen. So Atlanta is 43 over under. I think that could go by the wayside today. So I see some offense in this game. And so that I'm looking forward to. It's, you know, I'm in Dallas, so there's zero chance I'm going to see Washington or Arizona and Atlanta on TV here. But if I were to watch a game, that's the game I'd tune into.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned the fact that we get Kyler Murray back on the field and the double shot there in Arizona of getting James Conner back on the field. Listen, Kyler Murray last season was quarterback 9 in points per game, and actually was higher than that if you take a couple of guys, Davis Webb and Sam Howell, who only played a game apiece. So you're talking about the guy who was a top 7 type quarterback last season before the injury, before he got hurt and had to leave for the year. We know that Kyler Murray has fantasy value and can be a fantasy superstar in the right, you know, if things fall right for them. He doesn't have DeAndre Hopkins anymore, but Michael Wilson, who looks like he's going to be active today. You know, he's got Trey McBride now at tight end, who looks like he can be a weapon. James Conner coming back helps them. I've said all along, I like James Conner, you know, not as like some kind of crazy. He's not Christian McCaffrey. He's not Austin Eckler. He's not Jonathan Taylor. But the nice thing about James Conner is that James Conner does not have to come off the field. James Conner catches passes. James Conner pass blocks. James Conner runs the ball hard. When he's healthy, James Conner does not have to come off the field. And that's exactly what they need, because they literally have no one behind him that is any way, shape, or form good on an NFL roster. So from a fantasy standpoint, James Conner coming back rules. He was only giving you about 12 points per game before the injury here, but I foresee better things for James Conner with Kyler Murray if Kyler Murray can put things together and come back healthy here. I'm tempering expectations for the two of them probably just today. Atlanta is a little bit tougher defense maybe than they appear on the surface. They're a little bit tougher defense in terms of, you know, fantasy wise, but you know, I agree with you. That's a very interesting game to look at there. And there's obviously the talk, the anger, the angst coming from the fantasy community at Arthur Smith. And why don't you use Bijan Robinson? Listen, It's not necessarily. I'm with you guys. I'm all with you guys. Listen, I took Bijan in the first round in a couple of different leagues, including my number one home league, and he has been an absolute roster killer for me, unfortunately, because I have to keep running him out there. But it's not that they haven't been using him. His usage rates in terms of the snaps that he sees and the rushes that he's getting and the looks that he's getting in the pass game, he's getting usage. It's the problem is the type of usage that they're giving him. They're not necessarily they're not putting him in position to score a ton of fantasy points. So that's the frustrating thing about it, for Bijan here, is that they're just not using him they're not using him in the red zone the way that you and I wish that they would be using him. They're not using him, and he's third in the league in running back targets. It's not that they're not using him. It's just that he's not getting the usage where we would like to see him get the usage. And Tyler Algier, whether Algier has been good or not, whether he's been not competitive, but whether he's been effective and efficient or not, they keep giving the ball to Tyler Algier. Tyler Algier is averaging 3.2 yards per carry on the season. That's not fantasy superstar type numbers. That's not regular football superstar numbers. Bijan's averaging 5 yards a carry per year, but for 5 yards per carry on the year. But unfortunately, the reality is what it is. And they've talked about this week. There was a lot of talk about, well, they're trying to save Bijan and it's a long season and they don't want to wear him out. Dude, what do you got to lose? It's your best player. Give him the flipping ball. In the red zone this year, Tyler Algier has 26 carries to 9 for Bijan Robinson. When you look at receiving targets inside the red zone, it's 4-2 in favor of Bijan. So Tyler Algier has gotten the vast majority of the looks in the red zone, even though he has been much less of an efficient player. He has been much the inferior player to Bijan Robinson in a lot of ways. But yet, when they get down to the red zone, for whatever reason, Arthur Smith is trying to give the ball to Tyler Algier. It's frustrating as hell. I understand that. But the reality is what it is. That's what we're going to be looking at here. Injury slate real quick. Let me run that down before we bring Kevin back on, find out where, his last thoughts on the day and what we can see from him coming up this week. Quarterback wise, we mentioned Jaron Hall for the Vikings. He's going to be out today with that concussion protocol. You do have Dobbs active and starting on a full week of practice. So that's always nice to see. Ryan Tannehill is out, but he had been named the backup to Will Levis anyway in Tennessee. So, it is the Will Levis show there, but if anything happens to him, it will be Malik Willis today. Running back wise, Keaton Mitchell, the electric young rookie for the Ravens, is active. Looks like he'll split carries with the Gus Bus today for Baltimore, but keep in mind, like we said, tough matchup there with Cleveland. Damian Pierce for the Houston Texans is out today, so it's all Devin Singletary all day long, although it should probably be all CJ Stroud all day long there, regardless of who he has out, and we'll talk about that in 2 minutes here. Kendre Miller is out today for speaking of that New Orleans, Minnesota matchup, he's out today. James Conner is active. He was activated from the IR list. It does look like he'll play today. I don't know what else they have to offer down there. They have to play him, I would think. So keep an eye on that. Make sure that he's active for the game, but he was activated off IR. So both he and Murray are available if the Cardinals so choose. Wide receiver, you said Chase is active, but with that back injury that he's had and the soreness that he's been dealing with, you might want to unfortunately temper expectations for one of the top 5 wide receivers in all of fantasy football. T. Higgins is out, which makes the Jamar Chase injury even more concerning, because with T. Higgins out, it means there's a lot to be available there in that pass game. So if Chase can give it a go and can play the full game, it's a boom or bust day, I'll say, for Jamar Chase, in my opinion. Marquise Goodwin for the Browns is out. Robert Woods is active here for Houston, but he is obviously far behind the other receivers in that offense now. Nico Collins is out and is going to miss today, but Tank Dell, I think, has ascended and has passed Robert Woods on that depth chart. You've also got Noah Brown, who had a nice game, great game last week. So I'm not overly excited about Robert Woods today, but he is active. He's available for you there. Zay Jones is out again, unfortunately, for Jacksonville, but that's a tough matchup with the 49ers anyway. Justin Jefferson is out. KJ Osborne is out. Jordan Addison is the only thing they have there in terms of wide receiver help. I'm not drinking any Brandon Powell Kool-Aid there for Minnesota. But that's the situation with their receiving core this week. Michael Thomas is active, but again, who knows how much, if there'll be any disciplinary action there or anything from the team today, from the league going forward. We'll see. Treylon Burks is out. And then for the later games here, Michael Wilson is questionable, but expected to play. Mac Hollins for the Falcons in that same game is out. Donovan Peoples-Jones, one of the higher profile offensive names that got traded at the trade deadline, is questionable to play today. He's been dealing with some injury there for the Lions. Plus, he's still learning the playbook. We have no idea if he's going to actually be able to step on the field and be productive. So I still like Jameson Williams for at least this week over him. Curtis Samuel is questionable, but expected to play today for the Commanders. They're kind of, Swiss Army knife jack of all trades player. And then TJ Hawkinson, the only tight end of note really on anybody's injury lists, but he does look to be active, which should really be a big boon to Josh Dobbs as he makes his first start there in Minnesota, especially knowing that Jefferson and Osborne are out. Kevin, what do you got coming up this week, or what do you got going on? Where can we find you? And give us the rundown here on the full Wilson experience.
All right. So the full Wilson experience, you can find that at Twitter X at Kevin62WLSEA. And so you can always go to the Belly Up Fantasy website. And I have an article that's trending over there right now where I looked into the James Harden trade. Who was the winner? Who were losers? And so you might want to take a look at that. One of the guys that I talked about was the winner was Tyrese Maxey, who has really gone off for the Philadelphia 76ers. So there's that. And James Harden is a name that should interest people, maybe good or for bad. But he's on the Clippers now, and so if you drafted him, you were waiting. All you could do was just sit there with him because he wasn't going to play for the Philadelphia 76ers. So on the Clippers, at least you're getting some out of him. And so that article, like I said, is on the Belly Up Fantasy website. So get over there, check that out. And I have an article that's going to be coming out because one of our fellow Belly Up writers wrote an article about some players to pick up in fantasy basketball. Well, as we all know, in fantasy, doesn't matter what the sport is. If you pick somebody else up, you got to drop somebody else. So I got some drop candidates that I'm going to talk about in that article that you can look for coming out this week.
Excellent. Sounds good. Hey, you like Kevin said, you can find me on Twitter, X, STTChaseFFB. Get over there to bellyupfantasysports.com. Check out Kevin's articles and everybody else's articles on fantasy basketball, fantasy hockey, fantasy football, obviously going on. But all of that over there at Belly Up Fantasy, you can find betting articles. You can find all kinds of fun over there, and the regular Belly Up Sports site as well. They're actually talking baseball still on the Belly Up Sports site with the recent crazy news, and I don't want to get into it because I'm still in mourning over the Craig Counsell signing with the Cubs. But all kinds of things going on there. The hot stove is getting ready to fire up there for baseball as well. So get over there, Belly Up Sports and bellyupfantasysports.com. Find all of your fun stuff there. And then, hey, if you've got start sit questions, you got trade questions or whatever here in the last 45 minutes before game time as we wrap up here in Germany. We've got an interesting finish coming up here in Germany. But if you've got start sit questions or whatever, you can find Kevin and myself both on Twitter. We will get back to you. We will answer those questions for you. But until then, we're going to say, I'll bring him back on here visually before we sign off. Hey, good luck to everybody. We hope that everything goes well for you this week and going forward, especially if you've got the same players that we have on our fantasy rosters. But until then, hey, good luck to you. Slàinte mhath.
Everybody have a great week.